somebody you know just got a $40,000 raise. Maybe it was you. New job title, bigger paycheck, the number on the offer letter that used to feel like a fantasy. And for about 6 weeks, it feels incredible. Then something strange happens. The bank account doesn't look that different. The stress doesn't go away. If anything, it gets worse because now there's a nicer car payment, a slightly bigger apartment, and a credit card that somehow still carries a balance every month. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you before you get that raise. A $40,000 income jump can make you poorer, not richer. And it happens to smart, disciplined, hardworking people constantly. Not because they're bad with money, because nobody ever taught them what actually happens the moment your income jumps. And what happens is completely predictable if you know where to look. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about the invisible mechanics behind why people's financial stress doesn't scale down the way their income scales up. If you've ever gotten a raise and felt weirdly disappointed by how little it changed, this video is going to explain exactly why, and more importantly, exactly what to do about it. Hit subscribe if you want more of this kind of straight talk breakdown instead of vague budgeting tips. Let's start with the myth, because this is the belief quietly wrecking people's finances every single year.
The myth is this: more income automatically means more financial security. It sounds obvious. It sounds like basic math. Earn more, have more, worry less. Except that's not how it plays out for the vast majority of people who get a meaningful raise. And there's actual research behind this, not just anecdote. Study after study on lottery winners, athletes, and people who receive sudden income jumps shows the same pattern. A huge percentage of them end up in worse financial shape within a few years than before the windfall. Now, a $40,000 raise isn't a lottery win, but the psychological mechanism is identical, just scaled down. The number goes up. The feeling of security doesn't follow. Here's an analogy that's going to make this click immediately. Imagine you're filling a bucket with water, except the bucket has a leak in the bottom that grows slightly bigger every time you pour in more water. At first, when you're pouring in a trickle, the leak barely matters because you're not pouring fast enough for it to show. But the moment you start pouring in a lot more water at once, the leak grows to match it, almost like it's designed to keep the bucket exactly as empty as it's always been. That leaky bucket is your lifestyle. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Most people don't even notice the leak growing. They just notice that no matter how much water they pour in, the bucket somehow stays the same level it's always been. Let's name the leak directly, because once you can see it, you can't unsee it. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it is the single most reliable wealth killer for people who are otherwise doing everything right. Lifestyle inflation is the process by which your spending rises to match or exceed every increase in your income, almost automatically, almost invisibly, until the raise you worked years for produces zero actual improvement in your financial life. Let's run the numbers on what this actually looks like, because vague warnings don't change behavior, but specific math does. Say you're making $65,000 a year, and you get a promotion that bumps you to $105,000. That's the $40,000 jump. On paper, that's a massive win. Let's see what typically happens to that $40,000 in the first 12 months, based on how most people actually behave, not how they intend to behave. First, taxes take a bite you didn't budget for. Moving into a higher bracket, plus higher payroll taxes on the additional income, typically eats somewhere between 25 and 32% of that raise before it ever touches your bank account. So your real take-home increase isn't $40,000. It's closer to $27,000 to $30,000. Already, the number people picture in their head when they accept the offer is meaningfully bigger than the number that actually shows up in their paycheck.
Now, here's where lifestyle inflation goes to work on what's left. The new job usually means a nicer car feels justified because you can finally afford it. A used sedan trade-in for a newer model with a $450 monthly payment instead of $200 quietly removes $3,000 a year. The apartment upgrade, because you deserve more space now, adds another $500 a month, which is $6,000 a year. Eating out more because you're busier and it feels earned easily adds $2,000 to $3,000 a year. A few treat yourself purchases tied to the new identity, better clothes for the new role, a nicer phone, some new furniture, easily runs another $3,000 to $5,000 in the first year alone. Add it up, and you're looking at roughly $14,000 to $17,000 in new annual spending that didn't exist before the raise, spending that felt reasonable in the moment because the income supported it. So take your real take-home increase of roughly $28,000, subtract the $15,000 or so in new lifestyle spending that crept in without anyone consciously deciding to add it, and you're left with about $13,000 a year that actually could have gone toward building wealth.
Except here's the twist that makes this genuinely painful. Most people don't even bank that remaining $13,000. It quietly gets absorbed too. A little here, a little there. Credit card minimums that creep up. Subscriptions that stack. Small conveniences that used to feel like luxuries and now feel like baseline necessities. By the end of year one, the person making $40,000 more than they used to is often saving and investing the exact same dollar amount or less than they were before the raise. The income doubled in some cases. The wealth building didn't move at all. This is the trap, and it's genuinely sneaky because none of the individual decisions feel irresponsible in isolation. Nobody sits down and says, I am going to spend my entire raise and stay financially fragile. Each decision, the nicer car, the bigger apartment, the extra dinners out, feels completely justified in the moment because the income is right there to support it. That's exactly why it's so dangerous. It doesn't feel like a mistake while it's happening. It only looks like a mistake a year later when you check your net worth and realize it barely moved despite a massive income jump. Let's follow this forward a few more years, because the trap doesn't stop compounding just because the first year is over. Say this pattern continues roughly for 5 years. Every subsequent raise or bonus gets absorbed the same way. A slightly nicer version of the same lifestyle, a slightly bigger apartment, a slightly newer car every few years. By year 5, someone in this pattern might be earning $130,000 or more comfortably in what most people would call a high income. And yet, their actual liquid savings, their investment account, their real cushion against a job loss or a medical emergency might be barely different from what it was back when they were making $65,000. Meanwhile, their monthly expenses have grown so much that losing this job would be a genuine crisis, not an inconvenience, because there's no financial buffer sized to match the lifestyle. This is how you end up with people earning 6 figures who are functionally one bad month away from serious trouble, despite doing nothing that looks reckless from the outside. It's not one bad decision. It's dozens of individually reasonable decisions that never got weighed against a plan. Here's the psychological mechanism underneath all of this, and understanding it is the actual key to escaping the trap. A raise doesn't just change your bank balance, it changes your identity, and your identity drives your spending far more than your bank balance does.
The moment your income jumps, your brain quietly updates its internal sense of what kind of person you are. You're not the person who drives the old car anymore, because that person made $65,000 and you don't make $65,000 anymore. You're not the person who lives in the smaller apartment anymore, because that felt appropriate for your old income, not your new one. This identity shift happens almost entirely below conscious awareness, which is exactly why it's so hard to resist through willpower alone. You're not fighting temptation. You're fighting an updated self-concept that feels completely natural and justified. This is also why a raise triggers permission to spend far more powerfully than it triggers permission to save. Spending on a nicer version of your life feels like a reward you've earned, a signal to yourself and everyone around you that the hard work paid off. Saving the raise, by contrast, feels invisible. Nobody sees your investment account grow. Nobody compliments your unchanged apartment. The social and emotional reward for spending is immediate and visible. The reward for saving is delayed and completely private. Given that asymmetry, it's not surprising that spending wins by default, unless you deliberately build a system that fights back against it. There's another layer to this worth naming directly, and it's social comparison. When your income jumps, your social circle often shifts too. New colleagues, new neighborhood, new social settings tied to the new role. And every new environment comes with its own baseline for what normal spending looks like. If your new coworkers all drive newer cars and talk casually about vacations you'd never have considered before, your sense of what's reasonable recalibrates to match theirs, usually without you noticing it happening. You're not trying to keep up with anyone deliberately. Your brain is just running a background calculation about what normal looks like in this new context and adjusting your spending to match it. This is one of the most underrated reasons raises don't translate into wealth. It's not just that you can now afford more. It's that your definition of enough quietly moved to match the people around you. Let me make this concrete with two people, because the contrast is where this really lands. We'll call them Derek and Priya. Both of them are 30 years old, both working the same type of job, both getting promoted at the same company in the same year, from $65,000 to $105,000. Same $40,000 raise, same take-home increase after taxes, roughly $28,000 extra per year. The only difference between them is what happens in the first 30 days after the raise hits their paycheck.
Derek does what feels natural. He upgrades his car, moves into a nicer apartment, starts eating out more, updates his wardrobe for the new role. None of it feels reckless. Every single decision feels like a reasonable response to a bigger paycheck. By the end of year one, Derek's annual spending has risen by roughly $16,000, and whatever's technically left over gets absorbed into slightly higher everyday spending that he can't quite account for when he looks back. His net worth at the end of year one is almost identical to what it was before the raise. He got a $40,000 raise and built essentially zero additional wealth from it. Priya does one thing differently. In the first week after her raise takes effect, before any lifestyle decisions get made, she automates $1,500 a month, $18,000 a year, straight out of her paycheck into an investment account. She never sees that money as available to spend because it's gone before she has the chance to reconsider. She allows herself some lifestyle improvement too. She's not living like a monk. She upgrades a few things and eats out a bit more, roughly $8,000 more per year in lifestyle spending. But the $18,000 automated transfer happens first before any of that spending decision gets made. By the end of year one, Priya has added $18,000 to her investment account, purely from that single decision made in week one, on top of whatever she was already saving before the raise. Now, let's project this out 5 years, because the gap between Derek and Priya doesn't stay static, it compounds. If Priya keeps automating that same $18,000 a year at a conservative 7% return, by year 5, she's added over $100,000 to her portfolio, purely from redirecting a portion of one single raise without counting anything she was already saving before. Derek, over that same 5 years, has added close to nothing beyond whatever raises he continues to absorb into an ever-expanding lifestyle. Same starting salary, same raise, same 5 years. One of them has built a meaningful financial foundation, and the other has built a more expensive version of the exact same financial fragility he had before the promotion. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you if you're on Derek's side of this comparison. Derek and Priya make the exact same salary. They got the exact same raise. Derek isn't lazy, and he isn't bad with money in any obvious way. He just let the default happen, which is that spending expands automatically to fill whatever room the income creates, unless something is deliberately removed from that room before spending decisions get made. Priya didn't have more willpower than Derek. She just moved first. She automated the wealth-building portion of her raise before her identity had a chance to update around the new number. And that single sequencing decision is the entire difference between a raise that changes your life.
Before we get to what actually fixes this, it's worth naming the warning signs directly, because most people don't realize they're inside the trap until years after it started. Warning sign 1, your savings rate, the percentage of your income you actually invest or save, has stayed flat or dropped since your last raise, even though your take-home pay clearly went up.
If you were saving 10% of your income before the raise and you're still saving roughly the same dollar amount now, your savings rate has actually fallen because that same dollar figure is now a smaller slice of a bigger pie. Warning sign 2. You can't clearly account for where the extra money went. If someone asked you right now to list exactly what's different about your monthly spending compared to before your last raise, and you couldn't give a precise answer, that's usually a sign the money dissolved into a dozen small increases rather than a handful of deliberate ones. Warning sign 3, and this is the one that stings the most. You feel just as financially stressed now as you did before the raise, sometimes more, despite objectively earning more money. That gap between your income level and your stress level is the clearest possible signal that lifestyle inflation, not your salary, is the actual problem. Let's also talk about why this trap is particularly dangerous for people who consider themselves financially responsible, because it's not the reckless spenders who fall hardest into this pattern. It's often the cautious ones, someone who's always been careful with money, who grew up without much, who's proud of how disciplined they've historically been, often has the least defense against lifestyle inflation, precisely because they don't see themselves as the type of person this happens to.
They're watching for obvious red flags, like maxed out credit cards or an inability to pay rent. And none of those show up because lifestyle inflation doesn't look like recklessness. It looks like a series of individually reasonable upgrades that a financially responsible person would absolutely make. The credit score stays healthy, the bills get paid on time, and the wealth building still doesn't happen because nothing about this pattern trips the alarms that a responsible person has trained themselves to watch for. The alarm they're missing isn't, am I overspending recklessly? It's, did my savings rate actually increase when my income did? And almost nobody checks that specific number. Let's look at one more person, because I know not everyone watching this just got a dramatic $40,000 jump, and I don't want this framework to feel irrelevant if your situation looks different. Call him Marcus. Marcus gets a much smaller raise, $6,000 a year, a standard annual increase, rather than a promotion. It doesn't feel dramatic enough to trigger any of the big lifestyle decisions Derek made. No new car, no apartment upgrade, but here's what happens instead. Marcus's spending creeps up anyway, just more slowly and more quietly. A few more takeout orders a month, a subscription he never quite cancels.
Slightly nicer groceries. None of it individually noticeable, all of it adding up to roughly $5,500 of the $6,000 raise, disappearing the same way Derek's $40,000 did, just spread across smaller, less visible decisions. The mechanism is identical. The scale is just different. This matters because the fix has to apply at every raise, not just the big dramatic ones, because lifestyle inflation doesn't wait for a six-figure jump to start working. It happens on every single increase, no matter how small, unless something is deliberately redirected first. If Marcus applies the same principle, automating even 50% of that $6,000, that's $3,000 a year. Modest on its own, but the exact same mechanism that turns Priya's $18,000 into over $100,000 across 5 years applies here too, just at a smaller scale. The size of the raise isn't what determines whether this trap catches you. The presence or absence of a deliberate system is what determines it. Now, let's deal with the objections, because I already know what some of you are thinking. Objection 1, I deserve to enjoy my raise. I worked hard for it. You absolutely do. And this isn't an argument for living like you're still making your old salary forever. It's an argument for deciding deliberately what percentage of the raise goes towards your future before deciding what percentage goes towards your lifestyle. Instead of letting your lifestyle expand to consume the whole thing by default, while nothing goes towards your future at all. Objection 2, I'll start saving more once I get settled into the new income. This is exactly the trap talking. There is no settled point. Every income level has its own version of just a little more would make things comfortable, because your reference point moves along with your spending. People making $200,000 a year say this exact sentence just as often as people making $60,000. The habit has to be built at the moment the raise happens, not after an adjustment period that never actually arrives. Objection 3, my expenses genuinely went up. Rent is higher every
everywhere, groceries cost more. This isn't lifestyle inflation, it's just reality. Some of that is completely real. And inflation on true necessities is not the same thing as lifestyle inflation.
The distinction that matters is this. Necessary cost increases are involuntary and roughly track inflation, typically 3 to 5% a year. Lifestyle inflation is voluntary and typically runs far higher than that because it's driven by identity and comparison, not by unavoidable price increases. If your spending grew by 25% after a raise that grew your income by 60%, some of that is inflation, but most of it is the leak in the bucket, objection 4. And this one's sneakier than it sounds. I'll just be more disciplined this time and watch my spending closely without automating anything. Here's the problem with relying on watching your spending after the fact instead of redirecting it before the fact. Willpower is a finite resource, and it's especially unreliable in exactly the situation a raise creates: a flood of new social permission to spend, an updated identity that makes bigger purchases feel justified, and money sitting visibly in your account every time you check your balance. You're not weak if this fails on willpower alone. You're human, and you're up against a psychological pattern that has been shown.
The fix isn't more discipline. It's removing the decision entirely by moving the money before you ever have the chance to reconsider. Here's what I actually want you to do. And this works whether your next raise is $5,000 or $40,000. The moment you know a raise is coming, before it hits your first paycheck, decide on a split. A common, sustainable approach is banking at least 50% of any raise before you let lifestyle spending touch $1 of it. That still means Derek and Priya, in our example, both get to enjoy meaningfully more spending money than before. Nobody's suggesting you bank the entire raise and live exactly as you did before, but half of it goes to work for you automatically, set up as a transfer that happens before you ever see the money in your checking account, the same day or the same week the new paycheck starts landing. This works specifically because it removes the decision from the moment when your identity is actively updating and most vulnerable to lifestyle creep. If the money never sits in your checking account long enough to feel spendable, your brain never gets the chance to justify absorbing it into a new baseline lifestyle.
You're not relying on willpower to resist spending money that's sitting right there. You're removing the money from the equation entirely. The same principle behind automating any investing habit, just applied specifically to the moment your income jumps. There's one more practical step worth mentioning, because it makes the whole system easier to stick to. Give yourself one deliberate, planned lifestyle upgrade when the raise happens, something you actually chose in advance, rather than a dozen small, unplanned ones that accumulate without a decision behind any of them. Maybe that's a nicer apartment, or a car upgrade, or simply eating out more often. Pick it consciously, put a number on it, and let that be the lifestyle inflation you actually intended, rather than the invisible kind that shows up a year later as a mystery. A single chosen upgrade feels satisfying and complete. A dozen unconscious ones feel somehow like nothing changed at all, even though your spending went up substantially. It helps to actually write this split down somewhere you'll see it, the same week the raise is announced, before the excitement fades, and before the identity shift has a chance to quietly rewrite your assumptions about what feels normal. Something as simple as, this raise adds $28,000 a year after tax. $14,000 goes to automated investing starting this month. $8,000 goes to my one chosen upgrade. And the remaining $6,000 is a buffer I'm allowed to spend without tracking closely.
Having that number in writing does something that good intentions alone never do. It gives you a reference point to check yourself against 6 months later, when you inevitably start wondering where the extra money went. Instead of vaguely feeling like something's off, you can look at the plan you wrote and see exactly which part of it slipped and fix that one specific thing, instead of feeling generally guilty about money with no clear next step. It's also worth revisiting this split every time your income changes again, not just once and forgetting about it. Every subsequent raise deserves the same 30 seconds of deliberate planning.
before it hits your account, because the trap doesn't care how many times you've successfully avoided it before. Each new income jump is a fresh moment where your identity is updating and vulnerable, and the habit of automating first has to be reapplied every single time, not just set up once at the beginning of your career and left alone. The good news is that once this becomes routine, it stops requiring willpower at all. It becomes exactly as automatic as the lifestyle inflation it's designed to prevent, except this time the automation is working in your favor instead of quietly working against you.
$40,000 more a year should be one of the best financial events of your life. And it absolutely can be if you make one decision in the first 30 days that most people never make at all. The raise itself was never the risk. The silence around what happens to it in the first month is the risk. Think back to Derek and Priya one more time. Same salary, same raise, same city, same cost of living, same starting point in every measurable way. 5 years later, one of them has a genuine financial foundation and real breathing room, and the other has a nicer looking life sitting on top of the exact same fragility he had before the promotion. The difference wasn't talent, and it wasn't the size of the raise. It was 30 seconds of planning in the first week, followed by one automated transfer that removed the decision from a moment when it was never going to be made well by relying on willpower alone. Decide the split before the money lands. Automate it immediately. Choose your one deliberate upgrade and let the rest of the raise actually feel like the reward you worked for, instead of quietly evaporating into a slightly nicer version of the exact same financial stress you had before.
The next raise you get, whether it's $6,000 or $60,000, is either going to be the moment your finances genuinely change, or the moment your lifestyle quietly expands to swallow it whole. Which one happens is entirely up to what you decide in the first week, not the first year.